probably should have, when I found out the topic, I probably should have started maybe about 32 years ago to start writing it. Because that was sort of my assignment was, well, come and tell us a little bit about your career and everything that you learned along the way that would probably be of value to us. And so as I sat down to try to put some thoughts together and to illustrate them for you in a way that I hope will be interesting to you, I hope that you find value to them because that's the spirit in which I offer them. I'd also like to note that I come with special help today. My wife Kathy is here in the front row. She usually comes to many of my presentations so that after it's over she'll tell me how I really did, as opposed to everyone saying, oh, what a great job you did, those kinds of things. But she is also as much a part of this story and what I have to share with you as anyone else on the planet. She and I, over the course of these years, have mentored many husbands and wives. We've hosted soon-to-be commanders and their spouses to our home to talk about command from a couple's perspective. And so perhaps as we go along, we might be able to entice her to help be part of the Q&A as well, although she didn't have the advantage of preparing as much as I did. So I thought, and I've got lots of notes here, don't get intimidated by that, but I'm here because there are some things that I hope to impart to you. To start out with, I think one of the things is a saying that I heard many, many years ago in a land far, far away, and that is that you are who you are because of where you were when, and that is equally true of every one of you in this room. You come from varying backgrounds and experiences, family situations, and you are going through life in a period in history where the things that are going on around you are going to shape your ideas about what's right and wrong, what's possible, what's not possible. And so as I go through this narrative, you're going to see how where I was when has helped shape my career and my experiences, and I would tell you that I think the same thing will be true of all of you. The second big sort of foot stopper I put up out there is you are what you read. Now we live sort of in a time where reading to some degree has sort of fallen out of vogue, at least if it's more than 141 characters, it's a novel. But the point is that along the way I've had the great pleasure of reading a lot of interesting books that have affected my life and my career in substantial ways, and that's why you're seeing some of them in the curriculum that's being introduced here, and I'll sort of highlight those as we go along. And the third thing that I thought before I launched into sort of there's my life kind of a thing is the fact that what you say yes to in life and what you say no to in life will have a profound effect. And whether you realize it or not, you do that hundreds, if not thousands of times every day. Get up, yes, no. Go to class, yes, no. Take on that project, yes, no. Do my homework now, yes, no. Or take on helping my friend, my bud, my classmate, my company, make whatever. Yes, no answers will shape exactly what goes on in your life and the opportunities that come your way. You know, I went online and did a quick search for Oswego, Kansas. This is a picture of Oswego, Kansas today, one of the kind of town square here. Oswego, Kansas was where I was born in 1957, and I actually used to go to that theater when I was 4 and 5 years old. The Art Howard Furniture Store has been there ever since I can remember, and that building is, you can't tell what that is. That used to be Oldie's Pool Hall. Oldie lived out back behind our house there in Oswego, and my dad would take me there to play pool when I was 4 years old. I had to put a chair there for me to get up so I could actually see over the railing. Pool in those days was 15 cents a game. It was between my kindergarten and first grade year that my mom took me out one night and told me that she and my dad were going to get a divorce. It's a yes-no kind of situation. And so we ended up living with my grandmother, and we actually bought a little mobile home and lived in a mobile home in her yard in a little town about 10 miles away. And, you know, as things happened, my mother met someone else, decided to get married, and we traded that little small town for another little small town in Atlanta, Indiana. In fact, it's so small that the sign outside the town said 300 friendly people and a few soreheads. The soreheads were the guys on the town council who didn't want to pay for the sign that they got outvoted, so they thought they could easily acknowledge them on the sign. Small town, rural town, grew up on a farm in Indiana, and one of the things that you are because of where you were when. One of the things I sort of noticed living on a farm is that farmers help each other. Maybe the rains come at the wrong time of the year. You don't have enough equipment to get all your corn or your soybeans or your wheat out of the field fast enough, and so the other farmers bring their equipment. They all pitch in and they help that guy, and then they go to the next farm and they help each other out. Sort of a nobody left behind. I guess that was an early version of that for me. 99 folks in my graduating class. Some of the things that I said yes to during that time frame that would have a profound influence was a thing came up called Indiana Boys State. Anybody ever have a boys state or a girls state in your state? So, as high school boys, you show up at a state university and you form cities and you form a state government. You learn about how government's supposed to work. And oh, by the way, there happen to be academy cadets there from every service academy, Air Force, Army, Navy. And for some reason, which I don't fully remember, I was elected to be the city leader for my little town, and that involved helping people learn how to march and make sure our beds were made in the morning, rooms were clean, because the cadets were going to come through and inspect the room. I won't bore you with the long story, but we ended up being the honor city, the top city. And I came away from that experience saying, gee, if this is anything like what being a cadet is like, and groups of people coming together who don't know each other, achieving things that they never thought they could achieve before, maybe that's something I'd be interested in. And so my parents sent me off to see Uncle Rufus. Everybody's got an Uncle Rufus. Mine happens to be a World War II pilot from P-51s and P-38s, had his own airplane. So my parents took me down to Texas to see whether I had the right stuff, so Uncle Rufus could take me flying and check me out. So I was going to apply for the Air Force Academy. My parents went off for about a week. We didn't tell them. I soloed after 6 hours. They came back. Uncle Rufus and I take them down the airfield. We fly around the pattern a couple times. We taxi up. He gets out. They go, where's Randy going? All of a sudden I take off. They're having heart failure. And so I would spend the next couple of years in high school coming in early to clean bathrooms, sweep the lot outside the small Jim Dandy restaurant, and then wash my hands and start cooking breakfast so I could pay for the rest of the hours to get my private license. And another thing I said yes to was this thing called Junior Achievement. Junior Achievement was an organization where high school students could come together and learn how businesses operate. And that was kind of a difference, growing up on a farm. This is my farm today, not as in good a shape as it used to be. Bought out, used now just to sort of grow corn for one of the big agribusinesses. I went back there to sort of take a few pictures. That's my old basketball goal, better days. But one of the great things about saying yes to Junior Achievement is it opened up a whole new world for me and also introduced me to someone else. Kathy was president of her company. I was president of my company. We got engaged when we were seniors in high school. Wish I had $1 for every bet that I had at the Air Force Academy that wouldn't last. But of course, the Air Force Academy was going to be 4 years. She went off to Ball State, so that sort of began the journey separately, at the beginning at least. And so it was off to the big time, the Air Force Academy. And I have already related to you about a week ago, that I was sort of in the deep end of the pool in terms of academics and everything, because I, for whatever reason, sort of took to the notion of the military lifestyle, and we were all in it together just like you are, starting to do cadet week. For us, it was basic training. But one of the big things that we started to learn there and that I took away were two particular jobs that I had. One my junior year, one my senior year. I was a basic cadet training sergeant, basically like a cadre member. There's two periods, 3-week periods for the 6 weeks of basic training with the Air Force Academy. And so we had the first 3 weeks where we literally drug them off the bus, got them dressed, got them in line, got them a haircut, and started them on their way. And then the second job as a senior was being a squadron commander, like a company commander for basic training. Because I got to see the enormous difference, this enormous transformation that could take place when people put their mind to it and do things that they never thought were possible. Now, as you approach graduation from that, you're starting to think about, well, do you go to pilot training, you're going to get the opportunity and those kind of things. But one of the summer programs that I happened to get to do was I got to go off to Travis Air Force Base in California near Sacramento. And I got to work for 3 weeks during that summer with NCOs. And the chief that was in charge of that program was pretty savvy. Because the first week, he put me with a young airman, no striper at the time, who was working in the aerial port, which means they were building up pallets and cargo that was going to go on airplanes and be flown across the Pacific. And that particular airman was working the night shifts. We slept during the day, worked all night. So that's who I spent my first week with. And I was staying in the same dorm, so I understood what the lifestyle was like for that young 19-year-old airman. Second week, I got to work with a mid-grade NCO and to get an appreciation for the sense of responsibility and the leadership role that they play. And then the third week, I got the luck of the draw, I got to work with the chief. Now, part of that deal was during the 3 weeks I got to work on what's called the C-141 isochronal dock, which means you bring the airplane in, you tear it apart, you put it back together again. So I knew that airplane inside and out. So file that away. You are who you are because of where you were when, because that was the exposure I happened to get during that 3 weeks. And so after graduation occurred, well, I was off from the Air Force Academy to Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. And there, started flying. Yes, I know I'm in trouble. T-37, T-38, and the young lady who is now my wife, got to pin on my wings at the conclusion of that. Now, I don't know exactly how it's done today, but at least during that time period, your choice of airplane after graduation was dependent on your order of merit at graduation. Fortunately, because I had some prior flight experience and things, I did pretty well. I came in second behind a F4 backseat navigator who had about 5,000 hours, so I felt like it was a pretty good competition. Everybody was worried. There were only 2 F-15s. So they figured he was going to take one and I was going to take the other, and I probably surprised some, relieved others. Because I said, my choice is based upon the fact that I want to be part of a crew and I want to see the world. And so it was that major fork in the road decision, which many of you are going to face, is going to determine where you're going to live for the rest of your life, kind of lifestyle you're going to have, what sort of family life you're going to have. That is not an unimportant decision. And if you're not in the flying business, the kinds of choices you make in terms of what your AFSC or what you're going to go into have significant ramifications down the road. So you need to consider them. So for me, it was a pretty easy decision that I wanted to go off in the mobility world, and in fact got my first choice to fly C-141s, which means you get an expense-paid trip to go to Altus, Oklahoma. Anyone here lived in near or been by Altus, Oklahoma? Notice that only one person may be slowly raising their hand a little bit. I was told that it was not the end of the earth, but you might be able to see it from there. There was also a rumor going around that there was not even a McDonald's in the town, which my wife kept pointing out to me and telling all of her friends that I was taking to her to some place that didn't even have a McDonald's. As we pulled into town, there were the golden arches, so I required her to call everybody in her family back and tell her that, no, that was not true. So, getting to learn to fly that airplane and to be able to take it apart and put it back together as a pilot, as a co-pilot, was the start of a really exciting time in my life. This was Altus Air Force Base, as it looks now, one big long runway in the middle of nowhere. That was the airplane. What I learned, I think the big takeaway there for all of you, regardless of whether you're going into the flying business or whether you're going into some other career field, is this is the time to fully immerse yourself. This is the foundation on which everything during about the first 10 years of your career is going to be based. Because this is the technical skill that you need to master. So it was literally being able to trace every electron through the electrical system, every PSI through the hydraulic system, to know exactly how all the computers work, not so many of them at that time, a lot of analog things, but how you would be an integral part of the crew. And at that time, while we hoped to go to the West Coast, we ended up leaving and going to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. That would be where Kathy and I would spend our first 5 years, really our first duty assignment. Because up to now, everything's sort of in training, and you're sort of a rental unit, at these training bases. You're there for a short time, and they ship you off to the next place. But here, you start at home. Here, you get to know people really, really well. And so I spent that first 5 years really trying again to hone my technical skills. And here is where I would highlight for you the importance of mentors. For the juniors and the freshmen here very shortly, we'll be starting a mentorship program. For me, the mentor showed up in the form of a guy named Captain Mike Walker. Captain Mike Walker was a instructor pilot, the C-141. For whatever, well, there were several reasons we sort of ended up flying together on board on one occasion. And he literally took me under his wing and was really showing me the ropes of not only how to be a great aircraft commander, but also how to take the airplane and do things that would be necessary to get to the places we're going to end up going. And so when you talk about that, the Bully Beef Express was a unique organization at that time because of all the C-141 units that were in the Air Force at that time, we were the only one that actually moved these things around. As a young lieutenant, I was a courier officer for nuclear weapons, and at different stages on different missions, we were the third most powerful nation in the world. We would fly these around the United States, sometimes around Europe and the Pacific. We were especially trained on how to handle the weapons, how to secure the weapons, how to interface with the ground forces when we're transferring the weapons to secure facilities. And a subset of those crews were picked to do something that was even more exciting than I think. And that was what we call the Heavy Express and the Heavy Fire missions. What that meant was that over 5 years, I would get to 65 different countries. We would depart from Washington, D.C., take our uniforms off, change into civilian clothes. We would fly with handguns and other weapons, and we would fly to off-the-wall places. We didn't necessarily always have the best maps, but sometimes you land in the bullet holes were a little fresh and face-offs. Or in one case, I had one of my engineers holding at bay some Libyans who were trying to get on the airplane while we were shifting the cargo in Part 2. We carry our own spare parts, and basically we just go off track for about two weeks, not talking to anybody, and we were always on time. Always on time. That also gave me the unique perspective of how much to appreciate the country we have. Because one of the greatest parts of any trip was most times coming back across the Atlantic and you'd be handed off of HF radio, and you'd hear a New York accent on New York Oceanic. And about 243.5 miles out, the DME on the cockpit would swing around and start picking up navigation aid off the east coast of the United States. That was always a big deal. But it also gave me a wonderful opportunity, being a small kid from a small farm in Indiana, to see the world in so many different ways. And some other things changed too. Our son Stephen came along. And as you contemplate your futures, and some of you are perhaps engaged or will be shortly, or think you never will be, but I've got news for you. But you will go through this journey as a family, as a team, and what you do and the choices you make are not just going to impact yourself. They're going to impact your spouse, and they're going to impact your children. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing, but it is something that you need to go into with your eyes open. More to follow with these guys. Well, after 5 years, I talk about mentorship. A major who I was working for at the time put a piece of paper in front of me and said, "Sign this." I said, "What's this, sir?" He said, "Don't worry about it. This is a nomination for a program down at the Pentagon." "Yes, sir." And that's how I ended up following that map down to what would be the first of several, as it turns out, tours of that place. As a young captain, we went to Washington, D.C., rented a house there, and spent the next year being, in effect, an apprentice on the Air Staff. This was a unique program called Air Staff Training Program, or ASTRA at the time. Today it's called the Air Force Intern Program. It's something you should file away. It was a great opportunity that you would want to consider being selected for. What this meant is basically we had a free pass to work on the Air Staff at the Pentagon and be able to have a back row seat in many of the rooms where the 4 stars were making decisions. We got to see how they made decisions, the discussions that were going on. And one of the facts of life is that while you will spend the first 10 years of your career focusing on that technical expertise and becoming an expert in it, you'll spend the next 10 years afterwards getting out of the way of the people who are coming behind you, because now your responsibility shifts to making sure they have what they need in order to do their job, and this is the place where those decisions are made. So I found myself getting a big head start by understanding how the processes work in that town, how they work in that building, how the decisions are made for where money goes, what we say yes to, what we say no to. Now, one of the great things about an opportunity like that is most of the time you get the assignment of your choice when you come out. We actually had orders to guess where? Travis Air Force Base. Finally getting back to the West Coast, going to fly to the Pacific, since we covered most of the European, the African, and some Middle Asian theater. Except 1 week out, change of orders. And no, you're not going there. You're going to go down. It's not the end of the world, but no, I told you. Actually, it's trying to say that there is no such thing as a bad assignment. In fact, this was a great assignment for many reasons. What I was going here for was to become the instructor that instructed me. In other words, I was going to get to return the favor. I would take pilots who were coming right out of pilot training and teach them how to fly a big airplane, or take a co-pilot who's now ready to become an aircraft commander and make sure they're ready. Actually, the scariest kind of work to do is actually training instructor pilots. Because what you have to do there is I have to take them to their limits and expand them, but not be online in terms of recovering airmen. So I got to see that little local play, and I would take them through the simulator phase and then take them out to the flight line and fly with them to help them make their first landings. That was really exciting to do. But it also came at a time in our life where our son was going to start kindergarten. Here was a great small community, very small class sizes, very personable teachers. And it so happened that our Stephen's teacher, I think first grade, second, what's the number? You'll correct me, John.
I think you're going to tell the
Kindergarten. Said, Stephen sounds, his voice, it sounds like there's something not quite right. And I have the feeling that he's going to use his voice somewhere down the road. It's going to be important. So we'd like to maybe have a speech therapist come in and check him out. We're kind of going, he's, sounds fine, talks fine, okay. And what the speech therapist found out was that he was talking in such a way that he was sort of slapping his vocal cords together. It was, over the long term, sort of be damaging. So they took it upon to teach him how to lower his voice and control it better. So, you are who you are because of where you were when. Keep that in mind as we go. So, another deal that came out of the experience of flying at Altus this particular time was also that I had the opportunity to become the wing flying safety officer. And I highlight that for you as you think about your careers, because one of the best programs as an Air Force officer you can become involved with is a safety program, whether it's ground safety or flying safety. Now, at least at that time, and I suspect it still is true, in many cases when we're preparing people to be squadron commanders, we will ensure that they've got some sort of safety experience in the pocket. In the case of flying safety, part of it is you go out to New Mexico and you go to the accident investigation course. You learn how to walk out after an accident. Here's the pieces laying around, and you've got to figure out, why did the airplane crash? And the thought process by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is not unlike what we talked about when I taught the courses to the juniors and seniors about critical thinking. We're trying to get to the 5th or 13th level of why, because the last why is why did the airplane crash? And that's the thinking process that we look for in commanders, and that's why we put people in these safety jobs, is to develop those thinking skills, those critical thinking skills. So coming out of Altus, you also get a gold ticket to go just about any place that you would like to go. And so it seemed to me at that time, since I'd already sort of been doing the flying business for, at that time, about 8 years total, it was time to head off and learn something more about my command. So in that particular case, that meant going to Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, just outside of St. Louis. And at that time, the command was called the Military Airlift Command. And this was at a time, you are who you are because of where you were then. This was at a time where our Air Force was going through changes. We had the Strategic Air Command, we had Military Airlift Command, we had the Tactical Air Command, and this was a new era. We were in the transition, we get up to the end of the Cold War, and the way that we were going to run our Air Force was about to change. And so during the time I was there, Military Airlift Command became Air Mobility Command. At the time, the person that was in charge was a general by the name of H.T. Johnson. Now, my first job, I had 5 jobs in 5 years that I was there. My first job was setting up special missions for special customers. In other words, they needed something moved from A to B that was out of the ordinary, and my job was to assign it to a particular numbered Air Force, either East Coast or West Coast, along with all the information past that. My second job was managing the flying hour program for the whole command, for the strategic airlifters, making sure that we flew all the hours that Congress had budgeted for us. That meant that I had to brief that guy every month. You are who you are because of where you were then. He took a notice that, the fact that I seemed to sort of have my act together, could answer the questions cogently, and so I made some inquiries as to, what I might like to be doing next. And since I had gone to the Air Force Academy to be a computer science major, and that didn't work out, so I became an international affairs major specializing in American politics. I said, I think I'd like to work in government liaison, legislative affairs. And so that parlayed into, well, why don't you come down and work for me, H.T. Johnson, in my other job, because I'm also the head of U.S. Transportation Command. And so that became an opportunity where I started learning how Capitol Hill worked. And one of my jobs was to prepare the 4-star to go testify before Congress, which meant I had to know all the questions, and I had to know all the answers to the possible. And we would go to the hearings, and I would sit behind them with 3-ring binders full of information. And if he was asked a question that he didn't fully remember the answer, the signal was his hand would drop behind him like that. My job was to put the answer into his hand. Quickly. Well, he finished up his tour there, and it became my job to help the next commander of U.S. Transportation Command and Air Mobility Command testify before Congress, and that was a gentleman by the name of Randal. You might recall his next job after this one was he became Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Now, one little vignette, little story here. One of my jobs was to write the prepared statement that the people who are testifying before Congress make before the Q&A starts. And I was sort of starting to write, we were going to go to the Senate Armed Services Committee, which was sort of the granddaddy of the committees that we would be talking to. Sam Nunn, famous senator at the time, was still the chairman. And if you've ever had the opportunity, if you haven't, I encourage you to do so. Go to Congress sometime and actually go in and watch a hearing. See how your government works. Most of the time, unfortunately, what's happening is that the witnesses are making their statements and the senators or the congressmen they're not paying attention. Let's just get this over with so we can get the Q&A. I can put my face on C-SPAN and we can move on. Well, as I was preparing his testimony that time, I went over to the commissary, which was just down the street from our office. And I was going, I grabbed some sandwich, and I was getting in the line at the commissary, and in front of me I see this mother, spouse of a military member, and a few kids, and she was using food stamps to pay for the groceries. I'd never seen that before. Kind of didn't feel good about that. So I went back and I inserted a paragraph, a section in General Fogelman's prepared statement that talked about the fact of how inappropriate it was to be living in a nation whose men and women volunteer to serve their nation, but their families are forced to use food stamps because of the status of their pay. Now, maybe it was an emotional moment, it just caught me at the wrong time, but I still inserted it in there, cinched it up. Oddly enough, came back with no changes. Now, we went to the hearings, and General Fogelman was going to be testifying, and I think there were like 2 or 3 other 4-stars there from their commands who were testifying, and they had sort of gone ahead of him. And he started giving his opening comments. And, senators, newspapers, doing this. Sitting behind him, I knew when the paragraph was coming. And when he started in that section, newspapers came down. Sam then starts leaning forward. The other general officers sitting next to him are like that. All the questions that he got a few about what we were there to talk about, but most of them were about what can we do to help our men and women and their families. And you started hearing, and all of a sudden the other 4-star says, I'd like to associate myself with those remarks. Well, after the hearing, we went downstairs because we were going to go visit some other members of Congress that afternoon. And we brought some food in for him to grab something before we started. And I walked in and I said, General Fogelman, I'd just like to say, thanks for leaving that here. He looked at me and says, it's the right thing to do. Do the right thing when you have the chance. Well, General Fogelman, after I'd done that job for about a year with him, I got my 5th job. He was forming a 6th initiatives team, Command Commander in Chief's initiatives team. He hired one Air Force guy, one Army guy, one Navy guy to come up and work for him. So we get our little cubicles set up, and we walk into his office the first time. He says, "Okay, I have a project for you. I want you," this is 1993, 94 time frame. He says, "I want you to figure out what the world will be like in the year 2010, and I'd like you to design the defense transportation system from the ground up the way it ought to be." Yes, sir. It's kind of like the assignment you gave me today. Define everything and tell me what you learned. So, the short answer to how we addressed that was I got introduced to that guy, because that's the book of the goal. You juniors and seniors were told me. Because it was exposure to that reading that exposes to a way of thinking, exposes to how we would actually answer folks' questions, which we did, and still being implemented today as they implement the strategic plan. But it would have a profound influence on my life, because that particular way of thinking I would be using at many, many other opportunities throughout my career. Just because a friend of mine said, "You ought to read this book." Well, after finishing up 5 years there, the good deal was you get to go back toward Washington, D.C., but you ought to go to the Pentagon this time. This time you're going to go to the National War College. Which, if you're keeping track, I had done Squadron Officer School, my first opportunity for professional military education when I was in McGuire as a captain. And one of the things you should sort of put in your mental or your paper notebook is for professional military, when it comes to professional military education, go early and often. First time you have the opportunity to start taking a course, correspondence, take it. Ultimately, your goal would be to go in residence, but not everybody can. And one of the ways that you determine whether you're interested or not is whether you've taken the initiative to even start doing it on your own in the first place. Because of the timing of things, I never had the opportunity to go to Air Command and Staff College, the intermediate level. I went immediately to the National War College, which is the senior level. So as a lieutenant colonel, I find myself with other lieutenant colonels from all the different services. And we're at this wonderful old edifice in Washington, D.C., right up next to the Potomac. I had fellow students who were CIA officers, State Department officers, USAID officers, most of who will go on to become general officers or senior executives in their organizations. And our guest speakers were folks like presidents, vice presidents, senators, 4-stars from every command. Came in, would close the door and say, "Okay, everything I'm going to say is off the record," and didn't ask anything more. Now, there is a rule I should point out about education and stuff like that. It's only a lot of reading if you do it. I never got that memo. I did all the reading. They didn't tell me that until after it was over. Why do I always get the word last? But everything I read there is important, because this was actually learning about how does national security strategy get made. Because you start there, and that's what ends up in what we got last Thursday, which is what's going to be in your budget. How many airplanes are we going to have? How many bracks are we going to have? How many tactical fighter wings are we going to close? How many C-5As are we going to retire? It starts in this process. And it also included for me a little bit of a journey, because one of the things that I got involved with was understanding how international organizations work. That was sort of my field of interest since I was in transportation business and dealing with all kinds of international organizations. I thought, why not learn about them? So that involved that sort of my field trip, just to add a few more pins in the map of places that I got to go see. You are who you are because of where you were with. Well, when you sort of arrive at this stage in your career, lieutenant colonel, and it was now when you sort of, not that you necessarily had a lot of control over where you're going to go, but at this point you're getting phone calls and messages that says things like, act surprised when they tell you fill in the blank. So the surprise was that we would be going from National War College to only for a short time at a time. And the reason was because in the mobility business, when Air Mobility Command was formed, it was taking the airlift business and the air refueling business that had been originally in Strategic Air Command and then for a while in Tactical Air Command, basically bringing it together. And so if they were going to grow their future leaders, the idea was you should have experience in both airlift and air refueling. And so going to Altus was now about learning to fly a different airplane. And, as it turned out, a big change in our life. Now, interesting thing, sometimes things don't quite fit perfectly. So I had zero experience in the KC-135. But at the time I was going there, they didn't have a course that would fit in the time period that I had to be done in order to get to my next assignment, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And so they put me into what was called the difference course. The difference course assumed that you already knew how to fly the KC-135 and you knew all the systems, and they were only going to tell you about the systems that were different on the KC-135R model and the E model. Does anybody see a problem? What this means is lots of homework at night. And I ended up going from 0 to instructor pilot before I left Altus. So it was a co-pilot check. 2 days later, I took an aircraft commander check. 2 days later, I took an instructor pilot check. Now, there were some other things going on at the time, too, in that I was getting these sort of interesting knocks on the door. It so happened that the group commander at the base I was going to go to was down there for some training himself, and he knocked on our door one day. Kat and I were there, and he says, "I just wanted to let you know that you've already been announced as the operations officer for the squadron at the base." And I said, "Well, thank you, sir. Why is that?" He said, "Well, the ops officer's been fired." Okay, well, do my best. A week goes by, I'm still trying to learn the KC-135. Yes, sir. Congratulations. It's been announced that you're going to be the squadron commander. So you arrived at the base. I said, "How's that, sir?" "Fired the squadron commander." I thought if I didn't think it faster, I said, "How's your job going?" But I tell you that because that's sort of an unusual situation to suddenly take command when the top 2 people have been fired. And so one of the books that I was reading at the time was called The Effective Executive, which was talking about managing yourself before you can lead others, about knowing your boss, about knowing how to make decisions. All those things I'm thinking about, okay, how do I walk into an organization that's basically had its head cut off? And I'm going to take in an airplane that I haven't got all that much experience in. Well, picking up that airplane and picking up how to fly it meant that we were now ready to head off to the next adventure. And this was like due north to Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. Our first year there, I think we had 141 inches of snow that did not melt. So I'm waiting for all this bad weather we're supposed to have at Blacksburg that people keep telling me about. Coldest pre-flight I did was 40 degrees below zero. We did get one day down to 70 degrees below zero, but I wasn't pre-flighting that day. But the interesting thing about the business of air refueling at that time was while you did training at home, where we really did our business was an away game, which meant that we were going to, as a 912 Air Refueling Squadron, be on the road. And so, leaving my wife to shovel snow as it was coming down, we took off for our first deployment to a place in southern France called Istres. Now, the interesting thing about Istres at that time, we were supporting air operations over Bosnia. Now, our area was sort of right there in the middle where you sort of see a lot of concrete. There's a little area that's off by itself a little bit further up. We also had U2s that were operating out there, although that was not quite as known, except by a handful of people. So one of the lessons learned of this that I've always taken to heart is when we went in there, other people come in, were there before us, we come in, we were there for maybe 60 days or so, we go home, other people come in. As a commander, as a leader, one of the things you always want to keep in mind is how do I leave things and people better? Because you were there. So while we were flying missions every day, we were also painting rooms, and we were putting up walls, and we were replacing old equipment so that the people who came behind us would find a better place. And if everybody does that over time, that's why the Air Force gets a reputation for always having nice places. Not because somebody handed them to us, but because that's what we expect for ourselves, and we take it upon ourselves to make it that. Now, the nice thing about Southern France is that you can invite guests. So Kathy and Stephen came over for a few days, and they got to see places like Monaco, Cannes, and some of the other areas. But you've got to look for those opportunities and take advantage of them when you can, because that's not always going to be the case. In fact, after we finished this deployment, we went back home, and 30 days later, we were back in the air, this time not going to Southern France, but going to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And you saw sort of the landscape, Monaco and those kinds of things. This is the landscape of where we went to Riyadh. Now Riyadh, in fact, is actually right downtown. It's right on the edge of town, which meant as we were flying into land every day for missions, we were now supporting Southern Watch. We would land there, and we would be flying right over the tops of high-rise buildings where we knew that there were people who had surface to air missiles, shoulder-fired missiles. We were sitting on our flak jackets and things, which is not exactly where you would have it anyway. But this was right after Kobar Towers. This was right after, or during the time when there were bombings in some of the facilities downtown Riyadh where U.S. military had some offices. So we were operating out there. They came to me and said, we want you to be the first organization to move into a new place to get you away from town, to get away from the threats. I said, great, where's that? They said, Al's Garage. Al's Garage. Well, Al-Kharj. Oh, okay. Well, Al-Kharj, as it turns out, what you would call today is Prince Sultan Air Base. We left that kind of place where we were living in Riyadh and moved to this place. Except when we got there, the only thing that was there was the runway and the concrete of the ramp. There were some bulldozers out there who were starting to push some dirt around and build up berms and bring in rubber containers to put fuel into the airplanes. No tents at the time, so we had scrounged up a couple of old Jeeps and a truck. About 10 of us went down there. While my ops officer, Major Barb Falkenberry, who's now Major General Falkenberry, kept the air operations going. And they started shipping down equipment every night that we got loaded. They gave us a burned out mobile home. I knew about mobile homes. No windows, no electricity in it, but we started turning that into tanker operations so we could lay in some phone lines. Eventually the Red Horse team there, the civil engineers came and put in a few windows to seal things up for us. And in one day, airplanes took off in Riyadh, did their air refuelings, and landed in Prince Sultan. So we never missed an air refueling, we never missed an operation, and we seamlessly moved down and became the first unit opened up that is now a major airfield for our operations in that area. That was an important lesson to learn because I was applying the goal. What was the constraint to getting the operations up as quickly as possible, dealing with the constraint, moving on to the next constraint, and so on in an organized way. You are what you breathe. Well, when we got back home, sometimes you think the deployed operations are the interesting part of the mission. But we also got to experience what some people call the 500-year flood. We'd actually had an ice storm and had gone through and knocked out all the power at Grand Forks. It's now 30 or so degrees below zero, no heat in the house, no water. Sort of get through that. Meanwhile, the Red River is rising. And we, and along with everybody else on the base, were downtown helping people sandbag to try to keep the city from becoming awash. That didn't turn out to work. Not only did the town flood, and many of our Air Force members and their families' houses were flooded, but then a fire started downtown, so it's like the worst of all possible worlds. So we had about 5,000 to 6,000 refugees now, because Grand Forks Air Force Base is about 10, 15 miles outside of town. So all of them now are coming to the base, looking for a cot, looking for some food. Kathy's running the session there where we're gathering clothes because people left their work, they had only the clothes on their back. And then President Clinton came to town, so he got ready, get ready for a presidential visit so he could talk to all the people and write a check. You got the head of the Red Cross coming. This is Elizabeth Dole. And all that was at a time after 1 year to the day I've been a squadron commander. And at that point, I become a deputy commander. So I thought, squadron command, 2 group commander, same group commander. Yes, sir. Congratulations, you're going to be a deputy group commander. You have to have at least 1 year as a squadron commander before you can have that job. So on the day, of 1 year as a squadron commander, was move up, become deputy group commander, handle the flood. So where do you think we should go next? Well, that's where I got another one of those phone calls. This 2-star wants to talk to you. Yes? Yes, sir. Randy? Yes, sir. I want you to act surprised when they announce it. Yes, sir. You're going to come to SAF AQQ. Yes, sir. What's SAF AQQ? He says, well, that's a place at the Pentagon. Okay? We buy airplanes from the Air Force, and you're going to be in charge of the division that's going to be buying airlift aircraft, big airlift airplanes. You're going to be buying loaders to load those airplanes, and you're going to be modifying the cockpits for the KC-135. And you're going to have to go to school while you're here because we teach you about Air Force acquisition and how that works. And guess what? Because I had been there as a captain, I knew how the building worked. Now I was going to get to observe it, but I was going to get to participate in it. And because I'd had legislative affairs experience, and my job also involved talking to staffers and members of Congress on Capitol Hill, I already had that experience. And what you then learned at that time is something that you can file away for future references. There's an iron triangle in the Pentagon. You can master it. You get to go to the Pentagon all the time. Maybe you don't want to master it, but there are 3 components to how things work in the Pentagon. One is requirements. That is, the MAJCOM is you, the warfighter, say, this is what I need to go to war. The acquisition people are supposed to figure out how to make your dream come true. How do we get the companies to build it for a price we can afford? The third leg of the triangle is the programmers, the people who kill dreams. They're the ones that say, you got this many needs and there's this much money. And they figure out how to slice and dice your programs and slip things to the right, delay them for a couple of years. Don't buy 10 a year, buy 5 at twice the price. That's how much we can afford. And so I got to do that for a little over a year or so. And this time around, it was going to be different because now you get the other phone call. They say, we need you to leave because you're going to have the opportunity to command again. Except this time, you're going to go do it from the European theater. Now, I should point out that a week prior to this announcement, announcement, I had been told I was going to be the operations group commander at Andrews Air Force Base, which meant I was going to have Air Force One, I was going to have all the fleet that was the Secretary of Defense and all members of Congress around. But the night before that announcement, they changed it. They would be going to Air Force. Had to tell Kathy, you got to learn to drive on the left. Not happy. A little worried, actually. She was a pro at it. Very good. Now, what was going on at the time when we arrived there was the fact that I was going to inherit a group that had a flying squadron, know about flying squadrons. Had a mission support squadron, know about that. That's focused on run base operations, prepare and schedule all the missions. But I was going to have an aircraft generation squadron. Those are the maintainers. Those are the young airmen, those crew chiefs that are out there preparing the airplanes. I had no background in maintenance whatsoever. So, the Deputy Ops Group Commander made a mistake. He wrote me a note and said, if you have any questions, let us know. So I had gone and I'd gotten every regulation in the Air Force and in USAF, United States Air Forces in Europe, and at Hall, England, and the 100th. And I read everything that had to do with my organization, and I specifically was looking for the words, the commander shall, or the commander will. Because according to the regulations, that's what I'm responsible for. That's why I study cadet regulations. I'm trying to figure out what are we all responsible for. We say we're supposed to do this, so how are we going to do it? So I started writing questions. It says I'm supposed to do this. How do we do that? How are we doing it? Where would I find that information? So he made a mistake. He asked, do I have any questions? I sent him 17 pages, single spaced, front and back, of questions. And at the end I said, now I am not looking for you to do briefings or, writing out the answers, but these are the things I'm sort of interested in, so when I get there, perhaps we can talk about it. I actually repeated that when I became a wing commander. But it was trying to understand my organization and what was expected of it from me as a commander, especially for an area that I had no prior experience in. And that was great. Now this was at the time when now we're getting ready to go into Yugoslavia. And so we became an expeditionary group in place, which meant I had all my airplanes on the ground at Hall, which if you've never been there or will go there, which many of you will, it's one runway which is surrounded. This is, these are bases that were created in World War II to support bombers. So you have a lot of little islands where you park airplanes and things like that. So we were receiving airplanes from all over the planet because the pace of air operations in Yugoslavia was going to be determined by the constraint, right? What was going to be the constraint? Air fuel. Nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. No doubt, that's part of it. So to the maximum amount of tanker that I could put here, that would determine how many fighters we can put up over Yugoslavia, while we're waiting for other bases to be opened up. So this became literally a landlocked aircraft carrier. I maximized every parking space that we had. And at one point during the war, the winds were going to go out of limits and would put us out of business. Fortunately, RAF Lakenheath, a fighter base, was only 5 miles away, and their runway was a 10-degree difference off heading of ours. So remember that little excursion of moving from Riyadh to Al's Garage? Just replicated it here. Had them take off. We trucked all the equipment 5 miles down the road to the other air base, and we recovered everybody in over there. We operated out of there for 3 days until the wind shifted back. We did the reverse. Nobody downrange ever knew that we moved bases. The tankers were there. You are who you are because of where you were when. Now, this was at a time when my son was on his third high school in his third year. And we got a phone call. Randy, you need to act surprised when they announce that you're going to go somewhere else. My son was going to be graduating at Ely Cathedral just a year later, which is kind of cool. And when we came and we told him that, hey, Dad's got a new job. He's going to give up his command, and he's going to get in an airplane. He's going to fly across the channel. He's going to become the Assistant Director of Operations for all Air Forces in Europe. We made a decision that I think was pretty important for our family, and unfortunately the Air Force supported, which was that Kathy and Stephen would remain so that he could complete his fourth year of high school in the same school instead of having 4 high schools. And as it turned out, he was on the soccer team and all the away games were on the continent, so I got to see all of his away games and she watched all the home games every weekend. It worked out. But he was also, because of our experience, just started all the way back at Grand Forks. He found out that he sort of liked journalism. And on his junior high school newspaper, he got to work on that. Through some friends of ours who were starting a magazine written by and for children of military members, he even got to write some articles that got published. Got praised for it. We really enjoyed it. When we moved to England, he started working on the base newspaper during the summers, and was the editor of his high school newspaper and worked on the yearbook. And so when we completed the tour there, and they moved over before he started college, he got to work on Armed Forces Radio and Television and started doing radio. You are who you are because of where you were when. Oh, there was that voice thing back in kindergarten. One of the things we did while we were stationed there, in addition to some really interesting things to do with work, was I formed the Company Grade Officers Club. To be a member, you had to be a Company Grade officer. Didn't have to print out any e-cards or anything. You were automatically a member. You know, you're living in the middle of history. Wherever you will go in your career, here in the United States or anywhere you go overseas, you are living somewhere in history. Do take advantage of it. Anybody know what that is by any chance? Anybody seen War Horse? The movie just came out? Anybody? Got to go see it. It takes place during World War I, Battle of Verdun. One of the trips I organized for the Company Grade officers, we got buses to their families. We visited the battlefield of Verdun. There was so much carnage in the battlefields there that they couldn't tell who was who in the final analysis, and so they just started scooping up all the body parts and the bones, and they eventually built this. This is the ossuary at Verdun. And if you go inside, you'll look through little windows in the walls, and you'll just see nothing but bones stacked from floor to ceiling. Couldn't tell who the Germans were, who the French were, who the Americans were, just piling together. You walk the battlefields of Verdun, you can still see where the trenches were. Still there today. One Thanksgiving, Kathy and I went to spend our Thanksgiving weekend in Western France. Most of the places there, of course, this is American holiday. Most places there, because it was sort of the winter time, are sort of closed down, so maybe not inappropriately, we just had some crackers and some waters there while we were visiting the grave sites of the beaches of Normandy. And to stand there in the cold and the wind almost by yourself and to look out at places like Fort Du Hoc and imagine what it must have been like to come ashore and have gunfire coming down on you from those cliffs and not turn back. What kind of leadership does that take? What kind of leader do you have to become in order to lead people in those kinds of circumstances? Well, while I was there, in fact, just toward the end, the USS Cole incident occurred, and one of my responsibilities as the ADO, assistant director, was to form the battle staff and to basically handle any emergencies that came up. And they always seemed to come up when my boss was out of town. I don't know why that was, but USS Cole was one of those incidents, and so my job that night was to get C9s, another aircraft there to pick up the survivors and hopefully get them to safety. I was working at the time for a guy named General Speedy Martin. General Speedy Martin had a book club too, and he had a book that he handed out called American Generalship, and in it was a chapter that sort of popped out, and he says, "The primary responsibility of the leader is to grow other leaders." And that was going to become profoundly important because this was my moving day. We were packing our household goods up. Matthew was upstairs in the apartment, said, "You need to come look." The Today Show came on at midday there. I got up there in time to see the second airplane hit. I put my flight suit on while she was helping the Packers finish up to take Europe to ThreatCon Delta, start walking down and responding to what we thought was going to be a threat over there. That was a precursor for other events that were happening that day at the Pentagon in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. When I left USAF at that point, was to go become a wing commander at Fairchild Air Force Base. And when I arrived there, nobody was home because all the tankers were deployed, and I had barriers around our buildings. So it was, how do we begin operating in a world and an environment that was completely different? The big thing that I would take away from Fairchild is we changed the mission statement. Spokane being a wonderful place to live, to work. I took the mission statement that when you go to an organization, it's very obvious what your mission is. Probably sitting on the ramp or sitting in the parking lot. And I took those words and I put them in front of the mission statement. And I changed the paradigm. I said, our job here is to develop leaders. A byproduct of that, we'll fly airplanes, we'll fix airplanes, and we'll have a great base. We'll have a wonderful environment for families to grow up in. We'll have a great relationship downtown. Long and short of it was, we became the best base for base appearance in all of the command. We watered the eyes of the IG. We won the best wing in U.S. Strategic Command. And graduation took the form for me after I deployed my forces to get ready for the big push into Iraq, was to leave and go to Cairo West, where I'd be in charge of an expeditionary wing there made up of Air National Guard units. Now, if you were to pull up Google Earth today and zoom in, you'll actually see some remnants of our visit there. When we arrived, there was no food, no water, no shelter, no electricity, no way to get an air tasking order to know where we were supposed to go. And we were up and running within single-digit days and flew on the first time we flew. And if you invite me back sometime, I'll tell you that story. But it was a disciplined implementation of the theory of constraints. Every day we were there. This was at a time when I had the great privilege of getting on my first star, at least getting announced as getting my first star, because after that it was another trip back to the Pentagon, this time to work in the Air Force Studies and Analysis Agency in a building that had been transformed after the attacks of 9/11. This was the organization that really was talking about strategic plan for the future of our Air Force. How many airplanes? What kind of airplanes? Where should we be based? What sort of strategy should we pursue? And I got to do that for a relatively short period of time because somebody somewhere had heard about what we had done at Fairchild in terms of changing the paradigm of creating great leaders, and they, as in turn, accomplish the mission. So that resulted in pack your bags, now headed to Maxwell Air Force Base, where we began our tour there as a member of the College of Aerospace Doctrine, Research, and Education, where we had guest speakers like Newt Gingrich, who can, in fact, speak for 5 hours without notice. Be pretty smart about it, as he's talking to general officers and flag officers from around all of our services that I got to sit in on the back room of. But that was a relatively short stint because then I moved around the circle there at Air University and became the Commandant of Air Command and Staff College. About the same size of our corps in terms of class size every year, including international officers from 65 countries, and master's level program both in residence and online today. I got to go to the school I never got to go to, so I got an honorary degree on this at the end of it. When we finished up there, I got another one of those strange phone calls. Congratulations, you've been nominated to be the Deputy Chief of the Central Security Service. Thank you, sir. Google Central Security Service. Well, not only did I get nominated, I actually got the job. I would be going to the National Security Agency in Fort Lee, Maryland. And there, many people did not realize at the time that the premier Signals Intelligence and Cryptologic Command, if you will, in the Department of Defense has 32,000 uniformed members in all services. My job was to be the number two, the deputy to the director of NSA, who was also the chief of the Central Security Service, and that's a guy by the name of General Keith Alexander. This is just a 3-star picture. He's now a 4-star because they created Cyber Command shortly after I left. He called me into his office. He says, "Hey, I want to tell you what your job is." I said, "Yes, sir." I have my pad out. I'm ready to write down. He says, "What I want you to do is I want you to go visit all of our sites at least twice a year and tell me how things are going." Gets up, goes back to his desk. Well, that wasn't going to work because there are a lot of sites, but I did get to most of them every year. In fact, my best traveling buddy was that grizzly bear there, that Command Sergeant Major Roper. He's smiling there, but boy, if you didn't have your uniform right. So we got to visit some cool places, like that's us looking out with some young Army troops who live on top of mountains, who look literally out into North Korea, and do some other things while they're out there looking. That's the place there, Panmunjom. Now we're still at war with North Korea. There's only an armistice sign. There's a sign in that buildings that's just to our right there. And that's a group of North Korean spectators over there who are on a tour looking for strange Americans over there on the other side of the river. Got to visit some really interesting places, some of which are public and some of which are not. I'll just tell you, that's in the middle of nowhere, and you've got to go somewhere in order to get there. Then you go to other places that the grass is greener, but there's golf balls out in the middle of the field. Things like that. So it was logical when I left there that I would go down to Barksdale Air Force Base, where I was selected to be the vice commander of the new Cyber Command, and I was going to be the numbered Air Force commander for 24th Air Force. He was going to be the new numbered Air Force and new cyber for the Air Force. 2 weeks after we arrived at Barksdale, and at this point I'm working on manning documents, what kind of people, creating new AFSCs, working on mundane things like even patches. And I got a phone call that said, "Change of plans. Has your household goods arrived?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, we need you to come back to D.C." So I went back to the queue and I said, "Kathy, good news and bad news." Figure out which one was which, but point being is that we were not there for the stand-up for Cyber Command because it never stood up. It was changes because of the nuclear incident, the weapons being flown, they weren't supposed to be on the wing, some other things going on, like their secretary and the chief losing their jobs. But we basically got back in the car, started heading back north. We called the moving company and said, "Hold that truck. We'll meet you in Northern Virginia." Because now, guess what job I'm going to have? Remember that SAF AQQ job? That 2-star that called me? No, I need 2-star. I went back to take the job, the boss that I had several years ago. And one of the things that we tried to get done, that did get done, was to get a brand new, for all intents and purposes, C5N to full rate production. So all aircraft will have brand new engines, brand new cockpits. But my real task was to avoid 3 strikes you're out. The 3rd strike was that we need to get a new tanker through the system. So, long story short, besides working on that airplane, was to get those 4 happy guys behind that podium with the words I had written for them to say, announcing that we had a work contract with a new tanker. That new tanker is now decisions, what you say yes to, what you say no to, who you say yes to. That's those were the days when a hair was a lot thicker and a lot fatter. But it is an important decision about who you're going to spend the rest of your life with and what you're going to spend the rest of your life doing. So think about that. That's so cool. You are who you are because of where you were when. For all of you, that's just beginning. You are what you do. First, read. Second, read well. Finally, what you say yes to, what you say no to, every day can make a huge difference. So, with that, thank you for your kind attention. I'll stay down here if anybody's got any questions. Thank you very much.
On behalf of Detachment 875, we want to thank you, your wife, for coming and sharing this past time with us and telling us about your story in the Air Force. And I'm certain that everyone got at least one or two things that they've learned from this and they can use in the future. I'd like to present you with a detachment coin for coming and sharing with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, we're going to end because we have the class starts here in just a few minutes. We've got to get you out of here. That was an intense look and heartfelt look at one of our most successful general officers. I do not think you will ever get that close inside someone's heart and someone's soul and inside their marriage and family than what you just saw. There are so many nuggets in there. I think we don't have time for questions and answers, but each of you I know has a question about the moves, about the tankers, about his son, about their marriage. Millions come to my mind. Now, when you see this general, you have an opportunity, wherever you are, to ask him that question. So, none of you really should be at a loss on what to say to him the next time you see him alone. Because you know more about him than he knows about each of you, but soon, knowing him, he'll know all about each of you sooner or later. Take that opportunity to get inside the issue that meets your needs.